Okay, everybody, welcome to the Practical Tanya. We're covering chapter 14 tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about how the past two chapters, we spoke about the goal of the Tanya. The main purpose of the Tanya is that everybody can be a Beinoni. And we explained that a Beinoni is neither a tzaddik, neither a rasha. Does anybody remember here how we defined a tzaddik or a rasha in Tanya's terminology? So what's the translation of tzaddik? Righteous. Right, I guess you're all muted, so you can put in the chat box if you want. A tzaddik is righteous, a rasha is wicked. However, the real definition, the essential definition is that a tzaddik is he's only run by his godly soul or his Yetzer Tov, his good conscience. He doesn't even have a animal soul that is selfish. It's either eliminated or it's nullified in the ratio, and that's what a tzaddik is. A rasha is anybody that their animal soul has the ability to determine your behavior, even in a small way, like thought or speech. If it's something that is it's a no-no, it's one of the 365 prohibitions. Even if it's not a prohibition, even if it's just even if it's just about fulfilling pleasure, then its animal soul is basically determining your behavior. That's the drive of the behavior. And that's what a rasha is, someone whose animal soul drives their behavior. And that's most people, because we all have an animal soul. And it's very, we'd say a good person who doesn't do anything too bad. That person is a good person, but they're still classified as a rasha, quote unquote, as someone who the animal soul is a judge, as someone who is on the panel of decision making of your behavior. And in chapter 12, we said the goal is the Beinoni. The ultimate goal that we should strive for is the Beinoni. And we spoke in 12. The reason you can always you can choose the right behavior is because the godly soul is can be accessed through your mind. The mind is more objective in this, and if you go by that objective decision making, you would go with the godly soul's decision. If you look at the big picture. And the animal soul is the emotional, is more the emotional edge. And we said because human beings are programmed that moyach shalat alev, that our mind has innate control over the godly, over the heart. The mind has innate control over the emotions. That human ability can help us put aside our emotional pull and choose what we mentally know what's right, which is divine soul over godly soul. We spoke about in chapter 13, just an overview. So one of the tools. So the Beinoni is a very hard situation. On one hand, he doesn't have an easy insight. It's not always like, oh, I feel like doing mitzvahs or I feel like putting myself aside. No, Beinoni has the same insides as the majority of the entire humanity, besides the very minuscule amount of tzaddikim who have perfect insides. He doesn't always have that that orientation to do the right thing, but he can always overcome even a pull to the wrong side by his mind choosing what's right over the emotional pull. We also said another thing is that it's like a panel of judges that you have. Said in the Gemara that the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, they both are judging. They're the judges for the Beinoni. A judge gives their opinion, but they don't get to give. But if they're on a panel, they don't get to give. Every individual judge doesn't get to give the final verdict of what will happen. In Judaism, it goes by the majority, which the minimal is 3, 2 versus 1. So you say you have a Yetzer Tov, you have a Yetzer Hara, animal soul versus godly soul. They're each giving their opinion on the panel. Comes the third judge, which is God, and God helps the godly soul if we want to, if there's the will, and there's the mind space to go with the more mindful option. God will help the Beinoni, the average person, choose that. The only time the Beinoni has a little bit of respite is if it's having a really powerful prayer in davening, Shacharis, Mincha, Ma'ariv, and meditates and really can get into the prayer. Sometimes it can make the animal soul sleep for that time. I think it doesn't apply, that it would apply to really try to contemplating before you pray who you're praying to, what God, a little bit of godly contemplation, and you pray. It might be able to make the animal soul sleep. The second that the prayer is over, animal soul awakens, giving its opinion. It's this judge. Okay, that's what we spoke about in chapters 12 and 13. He talks to the Beinoni a few times in these 4 chapters that talk about the Beinoni. Now in chapter 14, which is the third of those 4 chapters, it says that the level of Beinoni is a standard attainable by every person. And practically speaking, every person should aim towards it, which is fantastic because that's really hard to be able to expect any person be able to control their urges and always choose the sort of more godly, mental, objective choice. Seems to be very hard. But he says it's very hard, true, but it's attainable. Because why is it attainable? What does the word attainable mean? That you don't have to become a different person. A lot of times we think in order to become very wholesome or righteous, you have to have like a rewiring, Here it's saying is no, you don't really have to change essentially. We'll talk later. Sorry about that. We'll talk later how we should try to change essential as much as we can, but it's not inherently required. It'll make it easier for us to if you don't always want to do, you're not always making, hard choices, you probably won't stumble as much. So you should supplement yourself a little bit. We'll talk later about that. But you don't have to, because all you're expected is to do the right thing, not feel the right thing. And this is actually an interesting point. The fact that, we think to be a good person means a lot of things to different people. Here we're saying that even the ultimate good person, the Beinoni, if you don't have to, you could feel bad inside. You could feel hard. You could feel selfish. That's not like the saint in Judaism. That's not the goal we're striving for, to feel like, oh, I just want to talk to God. I want to do mitzvahs. That's not what we're striving for. You should want to be this, like, really special, spiritually, always, just person. We don't expect that you should, like, be naturally a natural or become a natural. The goal of Judaism is that you should just do and speak and even let your thoughts go to where they're supposed to be. To do what you're supposed to do, speak what you're supposed to speak, and think actively what you're supposed to think. Which means that everybody is normal. They have an animal soul, and that's fine. And all they have to do is to try having perfect control. How do we have this power? So in chapter 14, how do we know we have the ability inside of us? Well, I want to open for any questions here before we go on. Yes, Terry? I'll unmute you.
More impulsivity. So maybe part of it is just slowing down and contemplating before you take an action.
I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
Oh, let's see. I was saying that we're all made differently, but I think that if we're tend to be impulsive, probably what we would need to do is slow down or get some help slowing down our brains so that we don't use the animal soul. We try to think about what we're doing and reflect before we act.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned, but I was listening to some classes on Tanya by greater black belt Tanya masters than myself. And one of them said that the animal souls, like, one of the trademarks is speed, to do something hastily. Because if you do it, to sort of do a desire hastily. Because if you really think about it, you might not give in. So the animal soul wants to push you to go quickly. Immediate gratification or quick gratification. If you really think, well, do I really need this? And it's so silly and it's beneath my integrity, blah, 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 you might actually not do it, which the animal soul is trying to get you to do the wrong thing. So yeah, I think slowing down before choices is a very good strategy. To know that we should never be quick to respond or quick to act upon an urge. Okay. How do we have this power? So we're going to talk more about this in chapter 18, but it speaks here, it mentions the concept that every Jew has something called the ahava misuteret, hidden love for God. If you would ask people, if you take a poll, you'd ask people, what's your deepest desire? Like, what's your deepest wish? So some might say, world peace. Some might say health. Some might say happiness. Some might say making sure my family's cared for, they all rank, those things all rank in deepest human desire. Kabbalah and Tanya, culling from there, says, actually, your deepest desire, the deepest desire is actually none of those things. Those might be very deep, but there's something even deeper. And that is that a person wants to always be connected to their source. There's a longing to feel a wholeness with your source, which is God. That is the deepest desire. It's so deep that the Tanya has to tell us about it, or we have to sort of dig for it to see proofs of it. Let me give you an example of a proof. It's interesting, over history, there's been many martyrs, people who have died for a cause, of all faiths, all creeds. What we find unique to Jewish martyrdom is that even many individuals who were given a choice of Catholicism, conversion, or die as a Jew, they chose to die as a Jew, even though in their life they didn't seem to, it wasn't such a big priority to live Jewishly day to day. It wasn't something that they were that they invested their waking hours in. They did it minimally, or even if they did it, they didn't understand the ideology. Back then, there was much shtetl, simpler time. We find that perhaps a unique phenomenon to Jews, that Jews would give their life even without a deep ideological principle they're standing up for. They just knew they're Jewish, and they couldn't deny that, even at the expense of death. What is that? Where does that come from? So the Tanya, quoting from Kabbalah, says that comes from this hidden love. And we can talk more in chapter 18, but I guess a little bit just relevant, because we are the either physical or spiritual descendants of Abraham. I say physical, some people actually trace, or if someone who converted sincerely to Judaism, they are a spiritual descendant of Abraham. But either way, what did Abraham bequeath unto us? And the answer is this deep love, this deep desire to feel and to attach ourselves to godliness, to our source, and not only ourselves, but to sort of see it and show it in everything we come into contact with. It says Abraham, he made the other people call out. He didn't just call out God's name or proclaim God's oneness. He would teach others and have them also proclaim God's oneness. Because Abraham wasn't just satisfied with like internal wholesomeness. He wanted to see God's oneness in everything he came into contact with. And we have that gene. That's called the hidden love. Now, because we have this power, that gives us another tool or another edge, how to pick the right choice of the godly soul, and not choose the animal soul's option. Because if you would think to yourself, in spite of the fact that God made me with a godly soul and an animal soul, it's not your fault, you didn't do anything wrong, that's normal. We're going to learn later in Tanya, actually the reason God didn't just like give us a handicap and say, just overcome it. but actually the animal soul implanted into every one of us is the purpose of the world, this struggle. It's the purpose of creation in the microcosm, and that affects the macrocosm. We'll talk later chapters. But even just in a very basic identity way, if you know that you have this spiritual adrenaline, this spiritual drive to always connect to God, and even you look, even someone who's, so not Jewishly conscious, or day-to-day life isn't like that, yet they were, when it came down to it, they gave their life for Judaism. And you think they had it, I must also have it. We should never be tested. But that drive is that they want to connect to God. So if I want to really deep down connect to God, granted that it's hidden or it's very deep, then why would I do something? Why would I make a choice, even a small choice, of a sin or a selfishness, which is also is in a very minuscule way hiding on God, at least temporarily being. We're going to talk more in chapters 20, 21 about that. What's the mechanics of why every sin is, in a sense, like denying God. But the basic is, if God wants you to do mitzvahs, God doesn't want you to do a sin, and you love God deep down, then why would you go against your real love? Why would you hurt your beloved? Why do you hurt yourself? Some people, so the people that choose wrong, okay, they're basically out of touch with themselves. It says in the Gemara, a person does not sin in Masechta Saita. It says in I think it's page 5a, a person does not sin unless a spirit of folly enters into them, a spirit of foolishness. As an aside, when you read a lot of translations of Tanya and Talmud, you learn a lot of like fancy words that are not in use. So sometimes I say folly, I'm just going to translate it into normal speak, foolishness. We only would do a sin if we get foolish. Because why? Because if you really are in touch with yourself and your hidden love and your mind over heart, you know what you're really about, why would you choose a temporary thing that goes against that? It's foolish. Now, not saying, it takes work not to be foolish, in this sense, but that's the basic idea of it. So a person can tell himself, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be foolish. I don't want to give in, even temporarily, to something that goes against my grain and goes against the Jewish spirit inside of me. Okay, Deb had a really good question. I'm going to answer in a moment. So the bottom line is, the reason we could be a Beinoni, and I don't know, it's not something I've mastered yet, but the reason it's possible, at least we should know some of the tool belt, some of the things, and maybe we'll be partial Beinonis, Maybe we'll be a Beinoni in a timeshare Beinoni. We'll be a Beinoni in a certain area. There's also a thing, even if you could master a certain area of interpersonal relationships or mitzvahs, ritual mitzvahs or ethical mitzvahs. Don't expect that your insides have to want to do the right thing in order for you to do the right thing. You could grapple, and that's normal because you have an animal soul and a godly soul, but just do your very best with all these tools, mind over heart, God, knowing that God's on your side, and knowing that deep down you have a hidden love for God and everything. You don't, it's foolish to go against that. Know that in spite of the discomfort of the grappling, you could still choose the right decision in thought, speech, and action. Only a tzaddik who we spoke before has perfect insights, the animal soul has been sublimated to only become like a second Yetzer Tov, a second good force. Like, those movies, those, cop duo where like one cop is like straight and narrow, very smart, police academy, and the other one's more unorthodox, but gets sometimes the job done and they make a great team. That's like the tzaddik, where they're both using the godly soul uses its characteristics, the animal soul uses its passion and creativity to further God's oneness and do Torah and mitzvahs. That's a tzaddik, but us, our animal soul is not yet won over to become perfectly pushing to do mitzvahs. It's going to push back. It's going to say, don't do a mitzvah, do selfish, do something against the Torah, do something against this deep core of Judaism in you. That's fine. So it's okay. Just don't listen. All right. Some questions. Deb said, I've heard that desire to sin can be worse than an actual sin. So first of all, and you asked, how could everyone attain the state of not desiring sin? So I think the Talmudic passage you're referring to is Kasha hidhure aveda me'avera atzmai, or something like that. Like, worse is the thoughts of sin than actual sin. So it's not about desire, it's about thinking sin. The fact that you have an animal soul that will have an initial desire to do something for the self, whether it be a sin, whether it be a kosher selfish pleasure, that's normal, that initial urge. I believe what it means when it says thoughts of sin are worse than sin is the allowing the mind to fill up with that desire. I mean, there's the pop-up window and there's clicking on it. So if you allow yourself to fantasize or meditate about the sin, let's say someone's jealous of somebody. So if you're allowing yourself to think of, I wish that person would lose what they have. There's a certain you start thinking how bad that person is because it props your ego up. So now on one hand, if you actually go steal from that person, that's, it's a worse sin. You have to make restitution. When you think about him losing his money or taking his money or whatever, you don't have to pay restitution because he didn't do anything. What it means it's worse is that in the three garments of the human expression, the soul expression, action, speech, and thinking, active, willful thinking. The willful thinking garment is the most spiritual, right? I mean, everything you do has a certain amount of spirituality. Your actions have a certain amount of spirituality. Your speech has a certain amount of spirituality, and your thinking has a certain level of spirituality. But your mind, it's like we said, who is the you? The you is the emotional repository and the intellectual, your memories repository. That's who the soul is: intellect and emotions. Then we said there's three garments: thought, speech, and actions. Isn't thought and intellect the same? No. Thought is when you allow your mind to fill up with something. You allow your mind to go somewhere. And if you start allowing your mind to go in a place of sin, it can have a more detrimental effect personally, not to other people, because you're not hurting the other person as much, than the action. Why? Because you're allowing the most, out of all the garments, the one that's sort of like a bridge to the intellect and emotions, and the more outer layer garments, action, speech, the active thinking is like in between. It's a garment, but it's like a very spiritual garment. If you allow yourself to fill up with fantasy of sin, you really are ruining your spiritual structure. If you do something wrong, it's very bad also. It also has a certain stain. But you can divorce your like self from the action, at least in the person. You can, I mean, it's denial. It would be you can't really divorce yourself from your actions. You're always accountable, but you're very, you know, a person that's allowed to like brood for the whole day about something can do a lot of psychological damage, right? Sometimes one of the big problems of not socializing is people can get stuck in their own thoughts. And that like becomes like a very bad vicious cycle. So we say that that concept of thoughts of spin are worse than sin doesn't mean it's worse in the sense of, you know, punching someone versus thinking of punching someone. Punching someone is worse because you hurt the person. You have to make restitution. But if you allow yourself to fantasize for a long time about it, let's say you just do it. Okay, it's bad, you make restitution, but you didn't like allow yourself to become a punching, thinking mind, you know, criminal mind. Allow yourself to like brood on it, you can actually become like a criminal mind. Or not criminal mind, with sin. I hope that answers your question. So your Beinoni is allowed to desire something wrong. They just can't allow themselves to start thinking about it. They have to divert their attention from it. Is there a good example of a sin that you can discuss in mixed company? Pick a card, any card. A sin, you know, let's talk, we give an example of jealousy. We spoke an example of stealing. There's actually stealing, there's like, you know, plotting stealing. A big example would be thinking inappropriate thoughts about somebody else. It could be fantasizing a sexual thought, right? Didn't do anything, but those thoughts can really have a very devastating psychological effect on the person. Now, this is not to say, you know, don't think it's bad. If I gotta be a, you know, bad guy, at least I won't think about it. Of course, gotta think, just understand the effect of thought having on us. Can you review the tools again? Mind over heart, one or the other. So in chapter 12, it mentioned one tool we're given is that the human being has a human ability of mind over heart. We choose to go many times, even in regular society, not religious, Tanya speak, even just in, you know, a civilized society, we will pick what is socially acceptable. Our mind knows is socially acceptable over what we want to do, blurt out or do. Just an example. And he's saying you can even apply that not just in a social context, but the social context comes from this ability that the mind has supremacy over the heart. It might be really hard, but that is an ability. We don't have to think it's like, you know, it's a foregone conclusion that, oh, you know, my heart's going to win. You know, why even try? The heart's going to win at the end. No, that's not the end if you really don't want it to be the end. The other one was another comforting thought that the animal soul and the godly soul are like two judges on a panel. They each give their opinion. They need a tiebreaker. God is the tiebreaker to go with the godly soul's opinion. It says that when a person wants to be purified, it says in the Mishnah, they help him, he's helped from above. Hashem, the heavenly realms, will help the person choose the right thing. So even when you're grappling, if you really say, I really want to do the right thing, I really, and by the way, you know, you can't always just say, well, you know, I'm just going to really, really wish upon I'll do the right thing. Something I really, really want to wish and do the right thing. First of all, you got to always question yourself. You're really, really wanting, is it to do what God wants, or you really, really want to feel like you're feeling good about yourself, which also is animal soul. And we said today, so that was a comforting thought, that was a tool. God's the third judge. And who we said today was that to know that even though you're going to grapple, that's okay. as long as the hero of Judaism is not the one who doesn't grapple. It's the one who can grapple, but pick the right behavior. We said not just, the heroic one-time Hollywood, choice. We apply it to every single action of our day, thought, speech, and action. Even if we want to say a juicy bit of gossip, we don't have to. We really want to. You want to say a joke that has like a insulting, you don't have to say it. You want to, eat something you shouldn't eat. Okay, you don't have to, and so on.
Yitzi, I have a question.
Sure.
So a moment ago you were talking about brooding, right? And it got me thinking about where the idea, the concept of self-reflection fits in. Now, thinking about the self, not in terms of did I do the right thing did I serve God in some proper purpose, but sort of more of a self-reflection in a more psychoanalytical setting. When people are trying to figure out like why they did certain things or why they understood things a certain way that they did. How does that all fit in? Is that a focus on the animal soul, or because you are focusing on yourself, right? Not.
So I get your question, like CBT, right? Like
What's
cognitive.
CBT?
I think it's a cognitive behavior therapy or psychoanalytical. All these things you're sort of analyzing yourself. So it's a very good question. This really lends itself to a broader question of, can Tanya replace therapy? Right, a person makes bad choices. Maybe could we just say that Tanya, read the Tanya, learn the Tanya, learn over with the teacher, so on, and maybe Tanya can replace therapy, right? Maybe, is that what the Alter Rebbe expected? So, in my listening to different people talk about it, there's a concept of an animal soul cannot be an abused animal soul. Meaning you're supposed to have a healthy animal soul. And meaning you have to be a healthy human being. And what that exactly means, okay, we can, that can be debated, but if someone is very depressed, although I think some of the tools of Tanya will help them even in their therapy, they have to repair their animal soul. Meaning your animal soul is your sense of self. Your sense of self and feeding the self. Now, generally, we say that's a good thing to have a healthy sense of self and to feed it, in moderation. And we say, Tanya says, beyond that, actually, that's not the highest goal. The highest goal is actually to live by your other drive, your godly soul, which is that everything you do shouldn't be for yourself. It should be for the sense of you're living yourself for a higher purpose. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that if a person would need the psychoanalytical self, I think it's necessary if they feel the need for it, whether it's therapy, whether it's just speaking to a friend, to work on a self-concept, because you can't negate the self and then expect to go by the godly soul. You have to understand the self and say, and we're going to sublimate the self. We're not going to give in to every aspect of the self. If you have a very bad self-concept, you say, well, who cares? Because if the job is to abandon and go by your divine soul, then, who cares? I would say a person has to, that's why you have to have Judaism is so big about, children, raising children and educating them. You have to give children a healthy sense of being. I'll tell you a story I heard. There was a guy, an anecdote, I don't know if it's a real story, a guy who was really, he was an alcoholic, and was really, really depressed. And, oh, I'm sorry. Guy was really, really sad. So he called to God, God, can you give me happiness? Lucky day. That day, God was answering the phone. God said, yes, it's your lucky day. I'm going to give you happiness. But, what do you have? He says, I have nothing. I'm broke. He says, well, do you have a family? He said, yeah, I have a family. I think the story is the guy's an alcoholic. So he says, okay, well, you do have something. You have a family. Or he says, I have a house. So he says, oh, you have a house. It could be a small house, but you have to give me your house if you want happiness. So the guy said, if I'm giving you my house, where's my family going to live? He says, well, oh, you have a family too? Oh, the price went up. You want happiness? It's not going to cost you a house and a family. So he says, well, wait a second, my family, but I go to work for my family. Oh, you go to work? You have a job? You have to give me your job if you want happiness. So, he says, but, every day I drive my car. You have a car? I want the price up. I need the car also for happiness. So the guy was so desperate. He said, fine, God, I'll give you all those things. Just give me happiness. So God said, okay, before I give you happiness, I have a few things to give you. Here's a car. It's my car. Here's a home. It's my home. Here's a family. It's my family. Here's a job. It's my job. I'm going to lend you these things. But you should know they're not yours. They're mine. You gave them to me. And if you want happiness, you have to utilize these things in the way that I would want it to be utilized. And then you'll have happiness. I might have, that's the gist of it. The point of that thing is that the animal soul is not to be negated or squelched, and all those things are like animal soul things, right? It's like Maslow's chart, right? Like that food, shelter, relationships, all those things are human needs. Those are animal soul needs. And you have to have them in a healthy way. We say that nonetheless, all those things should not be an end for themselves. They should be done. It's not what you do that's so relevant. It could be take a nice walk in the park. Why are you doing that? Is it for the pleasure, or is it in order to have a healthy, upbeat, whatever, to feel good so you can do God's mission for you? And I'd apply the same thing back to your question about the psychoanalytical and rooting, that when people have psychological needs, they have to get the proper help. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote that I heard. There was, they have this oral history of people that their lives, they met the Rebbe, or they had a private audience, and they had a story. So it's called My Story. And they had one guy who was from Australia, and he was a Chabad student. He became a psychiatrist, a psychologist. And he was asking the Rebbe, he was a very, he was a religious guy, and he thought that, maybe to help his patients, he himself should go to therapy to work at his own stuff, to know what it's like from the inside. And so the Rebbe, I don't think he didn't say good or bad, as you could do it. The Rebbe said the one important thing, which is interesting, and maybe it's debatable, but the Rebbe said the main thing, he asked, should my therapist be a Jew or a non-Jew? Right? Because he learned about, the unique Jewish spirituality. Maybe a Jew is better to go to a Jewish therapist. So what the Rebbe said, it doesn't make a difference as long as the therapist believes in God. It's a fascinating concept. And if you understand, all these anecdotes, you can't always go and say, and apply them to yourself without talking it over with somebody, because the Rebbe answered sometimes people in a certain context. But I think what it means, according to our conversation, as follows, is that therapy is a tool. The psychoanalytical is a tool. like eating is a tool, like having a good diet and exercising is a tool. If a person does those tools with a belief in God, that there's a certain bigger picture, a bigger mission, that's good. That's healthy. You're feeding your body and your mind, and you're also doing it in a way that's paralleling the spiritual reality that God, you have a soul and there's a God. If a person would use those tools, do any of those tools, exercise, diet, therapy, divorcing it from a belief of a creator, then it's still a tool. This, first of all, even then, the Rebbe would always say, go to brilliant doctors. So the Rebbe wasn't like, oh, there's magic. But it would help, I guess, particularly in therapy, where it's such a nuanced thing. It's not exactly like operation or giving medicine. That you want that sort of mind approach should really be in tandem with a belief of a creator. That's sort of a side point. And my main point is to tell you that therapy is a tool. It's needed for the animal soul if needed. But the divine soul is, once you take care of that, or even as you're taking care of that, you pick what is, you make choices that are God's will. That makes sense. Did I answer well sufficiently? Howard? You're on mute. You're on mute.
It's very interesting. The question I guess that I have, as I'm listening to you, I'm trying to parse through when one self-reflects on something that you've done, or something that's happened to you in life, right? I guess ultimately there's the way that you look at it is also, if you don't, you don't necessarily have to divorce what has happened to you or or what you did from a larger relationship with God. So as long as it's within it sounds like what you're saying is, as long as it's within the parameters or within that relationship of God, it's a good thing to do, because you're
absolutely. Every night you're supposed to have before you say the bedtime Kriya Shema. You're supposed to say Shema before you go to bed.
right.
Before that, you're supposed to reflect a little bit of the day, what you did. But I think this is the kicker. Imagine two doctors. One of they took a very difficult operation of a patient. They both cared a patient, and they both failed. The patient didn't survive. Two different doctors. So one doctor felt like got into depression, got really sad because they failed. I failed. How did I'm supposed to be this incredible doctor. I was a failure. The other doctor felt bad. Had such empathy for the patient, for the result. The fact that he failed wasn't so relevant. The fact that the negative thing happened. So the same thing with our own shortcomings. We can look at it in two ways. I failed. That was so beneath me. That didn't actualize my potential. Which is good, by the way. This is better than not caring. Like the story of the guy who goes into the bar and punches the bartender, and he says, "Don't come back here till you get 6 months of therapy." And 6 months later, he comes back, he orders a glass of whiskey, and then he punches the bartender again. He says, "I told you you can't come back till you go to therapy." He says, I went to therapy. He says, "So what happened?" He says, "Now I'm not ashamed of my problems." So better to have some level of shame, or even if it's you feel bad about your own failure. But the goal is that it's not about you. Even your failures are not about you. When we believe that there's a creator, it's actually today starts in two of the cycles of the daily Rambam. So as I mentioned, some people, they're starting the new Maimonides cycle. So there's something called the Daily Mitzvah. Some of you get it by email. The Daily Mitzvah, which is reflective of it's a miniature version of the 3-chapter cycle, the laws of Maimonides. Maimonides wrote all 613 and gave a treatise on all the mitzvahs. And he said, the first mitzvah is, Anochi Hashem Lakecha. I believe that there's a God. And it isn't to believe there's a God, it says to know there's a God. How do you know there's a God? You look at the world, look at the creation, you look at the intricacy of the orbits and the never-endingness of the orbits that they go around. You realize there's a creator. It's important to couple our own sense of accomplishment and spiritual growth with it's not only about us, it's about a bigger plan. Otherwise, you can get hung up, I failed, I was successful, versus that Baruch Hashem was successful, there was more holiness in the world today. The world's getting closer to Mashiach. I failed, I hit on the lights. How could I do that? How could I make sure I don't hide the light of God's presence in my small area of the world? That type of thing. So all these things have a place, but we can't fall into the trap of being about ourselves. I think that's one important thing about Tanya. I know Tanya teaches vis-a-vis other Jewish philosophical, even religious philosophy, that many times there's another school of thought called Musar. Musar is about ethical refinement. And a lot of it it talks about how beneath you stuff should be. Like it should be beneath you to sin. It should be beneath you to, how shameful it is, or how, you're going to be so embarrassed in the world to come. He uses that. And while that could be effective for some people, there's one problem with that from a growth standpoint. It's still about you. Hasidism, Tanya says that divine soul is not even about you like doing mitzvahs 100. Some people could do mitzvahs the whole day so they can have a good afterlife. The motivation there, it's a more spiritual animal soul. That's animal soul. That's self. What do you mean? They're saintly. They're doing mitzvahs all day. Yeah, but what's their motivation? Motivation is some version of me. So divine soul takes a prerequisite of there's a God. That's the real reality of the world. That's the real purpose. And that's what actually you have that hidden love. The divine soul actually doesn't want to do stuff for itself. It wants to do stuff for higher purpose. The very key shift. That it shouldn't, being about me doesn't mean doing gross base things. You could do very sophisticated, even very spiritual things where the main character that's pivoting is about the self. The divine soul is saying you have a drive that wants to not even care about yourself, even your self-spirituality. It says this, the Alter Rebbe was known to say, he was quoted saying many times, he was quoted saying, I don't want anything. Ich will ze garnish. I don't want heaven. I don't want the world to come. I only want you alone, God. What he means is that even though there's a spiritual reality, when a person passes away, they have divine delight in God's source. But that's not what, that's the spiritual delight. That's not what he wants. He wants what God wants. And we also, deep down, we also want what God wants. To finish off before we run out of time, it says, so remember we had a question, and we said there's an oath. The oath we said that we all make before we go to this world is, what was it? The angels administer an oath, be a tzaddik, and don't be a rasha. So based on what we learned, what does that mean? Be a tzaddik, well, be a tzaddik. Wait a second. You can't be a tzaddik. You can't have perfect insides. It's not even a goal for most of us. So it says, if that's the case, at least don't be a rasha. In your behavior, don't be a rasha. That's what it means. Try to be a tzaddik, being perfect outsides and insides. But if you're a Beinoni, if you're like everybody else, all of us, at least it's not repeating itself, be good, don't be bad. It's saying the same thing. Be a tzaddik. And if you can't be a tzaddik, at least behaviorally, don't be a rasha. Beyond that. And that's what it means to be a Beinoni. Even if you can't be a tzaddik inside, don't be a rasha on the outside. That's a Beinoni. Don't give in to the animal soul. Another point says, very cool, is actually you could be a tzaddik, or you should never stop trying to be a tzaddik. tzaddik defined as having more of an inside. We're going to learn later, you can't just like yell at yourself and like squalsh your animals all the time. So you have to try to like transform yourself a little bit. We'll talk how in a couple chapters, but for now, a couple things. First of all, you have to try to be a tzaddik. You try to learn about God, learn, awaken yourself. Two, let's say you want to do a sin. It talks an example in Tanya, in the Mishnah, that if someone desires something, they should think like, I want that food, right? If there's the wrong food to have, the wrong wasn't kosher. You start thinking that, this food will become waste. You think you like reframe. The food is very naturally desirable. You think your mind, wait a second, but it's so temporal and just gonna become garbage. Like you can reframe it that you shouldn't even want it as much, right? You actually can train yourself to stop being tempted by everything in the same way. You can work your temptations. Two, the more you do this, habit becomes second nature. So you might not be a tzaddik, you're really doing, really have abhorrence to bad, but by turning away from it enough, you might start not really wanting it as much. And the last thing is very important, that there's a Kabbalistic idea about in-life reincarnation. It's called the pregnancy of the soul. It says sometimes when you really try to rejoice, you try to learn about God and to rejoice in mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs, life, your life and your happiness, you'll get a spark of a tzaddik in you. You'll be connected to a tzaddik. This actually is a very big tenet of Hasidic belief. We talk about having a connection to the Rebbe. Even though the Rebbe passed away, we feel we have a connection to the Rebbe because the Rebbe was a tzaddik. And we connect to the Rebbe. It's not only like, well, we're going to try to do our best to be like a miniature, imperfect Rebbe. We'll learn some of his ways. We believe there's a spiritual connection that actually makes us to like the things that he liked, which is God's will to happen, God's purpose, God's Mashiach to happen in this world. So when we connect to a tzaddik, let's say the Rebbe, it actually helps your insides want the right things. With that, I wish you all a good night. Next week we'll do chapter 15. To summarize, we learned tonight about, we learned all the tools of the Beinoni. And the last thing is we also learned, don't be a Russian behavior. You can try to be a tzaddik, and maybe you'll have a little bit of help from connecting to another tzaddik.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.
Thank you.